I don't know how bad it's been showing up in the audio, but my chair's time to get a new chair. It's kind of squeaky.
Squeaky?
Yeah.
Well, you're a horror movie host. You should have
Have the squeaky chair.
That's right. You should have cobwebs hanging and
Yeah.
squeaky chair. Maybe get a fog machine.
There we go. That's what I'll get. Fog machine will be the next thing, I guess.
That's nice. Would be a nice touch. Yes.
Yeah. All right. So, I guess first thing I want to start in on is something I heard about this movie, and that it is at the time, I guess, the only movie that was a almost complete copy of the book. The script was like basically the book, and no other movie does that anymore.
It is very similar. I read the book many, many times over the years. I've read it so often that it's actually falling apart. This was a paperback that came out, I guess, in 1967. It was a tremendously popular book. I mean, I think they said it sold 4 million copies. And I guess almost single-handedly, you could say that the success of this book inspired the whole horror novel genre. Horror had always been popular, obviously, but it was always considered a lower level thing that guys like H.P. Lovecraft would write in the pulp magazines. And there were a few other people that were probably well regarded as horror, but it was a sort of, it was not, didn't have the best reputation.
Right.
People would always talk about Bram Stoker and Mary Shelley as the sort of classics of the thing, Edgar Allan Poe, obviously. But this was the first time that somebody had an enormous bestseller that was, like a cultural phenomenon. And that inspired, of course, The Exorcist. And it probably was one of the reasons why David Seltzer wrote a novel adaptation of his screenplay for The Omen, because he wanted to have a big hit like this. But Roman Polanski wrote the screenplay for this. He did the screenplay adaptation, and he won an Oscar for it, actually.
For the screenplay.
Right. It was one of the 2 Oscars that Rosemary's Baby won that year. William Castle, who we have spoken about before,
yes.
This was his big, classy movie. This was the thing that his one instance where he did something that wasn't gimmicky.
And yeah, I guess this was gonna bring him out of the B movie schlock, and
that was his plan. Yeah.
Yeah. But then he couldn't direct it.
Yeah, well, I've heard different stories. Now, some people say that he mortgaged his house in order to buy the novel. He read it in galley form.
Yeah.
And then he scurried off to Robert Evans, who was running Paramount at the time, and said, "This you must produce, and I want to direct." And Robert Evans said, "No, this Roman Polanski guy will get him." Roman Polanski at the time was one of the most controversial and also one of the most influential directors on the scene. He had that special cachet because he was a foreign director. He wasn't an American, wasn't born in America. And that was right at the time in the New Hollywood when a lot of the filmmakers in the United States were looking to Europe for inspiration. It was the place where all the most interesting stuff was being done. So he became like a big deal. He had he did Knife in the Water, which was, I guess, a Polish film. And he did the one with Catherine Deneuve, Repulsion, which was a British film, I guess. And he did Cul-de-sac, which I believe was a Donald Pleasance film. I think that was also British, because I think Rosemary's Baby was his first American film.
Yeah.
By the time they got him, he was a hot property and, world famous, and everybody was expecting a lot. Anyway, the reason why I mention all this is because William Castle has speculated that the reason why Roman Polanski kept the book so close to the novel was because it was the first time he was adapting a novel for the screen, and he maybe didn't realize he was allowed to go off on his own.
Yeah.
But I tend to think that Roman Polanski always, for all his other flaws, and there are many, and we won't go into all the stuff that could be said against him, he's certainly no fool, and he's certainly a brilliant director. And I think that he recognized in this book, because one of the qualities that Ira Levin always had in his books is conciseness. He knows exactly what elements have to be in the story in order to get the effect that he wants. Stephen King referred to him as the Swiss watchmaker of thriller writers. And he was a big fan of people like Agatha Christie, who also had those sort of intricate, tricky plots. And of course, later he would write his Death Trap, which was, I think at the time, may have been one of the last really big Broadway thrillers. The Broadway thriller was a genre that lasted for decades. And by the time Death Trap came along, there hadn't been any for a while, and there weren't any after that. Matter of fact, Stephen Sondheim, of all people, tried to write a thriller some years, I guess it was in the 80s. Actually, it was in the late 80s, early 90s. And it actually got on Broadway because of his reputation, Stephen Sondheim.
Yeah.
Of course, anything Stephen wants to do. He's passed away recently, unfortunately. But anyway, that was a bomb. Nobody seemed to be able to do thrillers anymore. And I think probably the main reason was the thriller genre was done better in movies. That type of thriller that Agatha Christie wrote, the ones that did so well on stage, and some of her plays ran for years. The Mousetrap, which wasn't even one of her better ones, that ran in England. I think it's still running. I mean, it was like a tourist attraction. You go and see this play that's been running forever. And Ira Levin was a fan of Christie's. He was a fan of that type of stuff. And Death Trap was his attempt to write something like Sleuth, which was the previous giant thriller hit on Broadway. I don't know if you've ever heard of Sleuth. That was
it sounds familiar, but
at the time it came out, it was a sensation. And they made a film with Michael Caine and Laurence Olivier that was up for a couple of Oscars. Death Trap is an attempt to do the same thing. As a matter of fact, Michael Caine is in the movie version along with our friend Christopher Reeve, who we just spoke about in the last episode. They're in the film adaptation of Death Trap, which is pretty good. But anyway, that's William Castle's notion that Roman Polanski didn't realize that he could expand upon what Ira Levin wrote. I think that that Polanski just realized he didn't need to expand, that he had it all in there. Because the beautiful thing about Ira Levin's book, and it's true of the film as well, is that there are no extraneous details. Everything is called back to later, right? Every little detail that's raised at one point, it's brought up again in one way or another. There are like echoes of things all through the film, and that's all stuff that comes from the book, And there are, I don't know what you said. You had watched this recently, and it sort of inspired you to want to do this.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it before. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I just, watched it again. I was like, well, let's go and talk about it.
Well, I had watched it, I guess, about a year ago, and I wasn't so sure I wanted to watch it again so soon because I was afraid I wouldn't enjoy it. But I have to admit, it always lures me in. And I think the reason is because it's just such an entertaining film.
Yeah.
It's similar in a way to The Exorcist and The Omen in that it creates an environment which is actually a pleasant, almost a romantic vision of life. And then it introduces the horror element.
Yeah.
And so the horror element is that much more effective because it's against the background of this sort of wonderful, pleasant existence, these charming people. You look at Rosemary and Guy, young couple, attractive, intelligent. Guy apparently isn't a talented actor. They're enjoying a little bit of financial success because of his TV commercials. They're moving to this exclusive place in Manhattan, and a good chunk of the movie is this wonderful adventure of following them as they're sort of setting themselves up in this new life. The future looks so bright, right? And I have a sort of personal attachment to this because, I mean, I saw this movie first when it played on broadcast TV for the first time back in the 70s, I guess. Yeah. And I was a little boy, and my parents had read the book, and so they wanted to see the film, so we all gathered around the TV to watch it. And I thought it was terrific then, and I watched it every time it was on TV. But in the, I guess it was in the early aughts, 2001, 2002, I moved from my house in Queens to an apartment that was down the block from the Dakota.
Oh, okay. That's cool.
So I lived on the same block that Rosemary and Guy lived on. And I remember that feeling that I had when I was moving into this, because obviously you move into Manhattan, you move into a fancy building, that has a reputation. I mean, it actually has a name.
Yeah.
They called my building the Ruxton Towers. Obviously, the Dakota has its name. And there's so much history in these places that you
It's
really
where John Lennon was shot, right?
John
Dakota.
Lennon got shot, and there have probably been a lot. Of course, there were a lot of celebrities living there at the time. The first couple of days I was living there, I was walking around the neighborhood, and I was passing the Dakota, admiring the wonderful black metal sculptures. They have a fence that has like these embossed metal lions in it. And as I'm walking along, there's a woman getting out of a cab, and she's backing out of the cab, and I almost bumped into her. And I look back, and it was Lauren McCall. So I said, Bill, you're living high on the hog. I shouldn't have been living that high, because
Yeah.
I was spending almost $1,000 a month to live in a tiny little room on 72nd Street. So it probably wasn't so smart. And of course, I was aware of Rosemary's Baby, and I was aware that the exteriors, at least, were shot on that street by the Dakota. So it's kind of a thrilling thing. And I felt something of what they were feeling, that this was a new life,
Yeah.
a great opportunity for me, And in the movie, you see her making new pillow cushions for the window seats, putting up the wallpaper. Everything is beautiful and clean. Everything's yellow. Yellow is a color that, I originally thought that yellow represents the sun. It's supposed to be optimistic and hopeful and innocence. But also the particular tone of yellow that they sometimes use, and Rosemary always seems to be surrounded by something yellow on the sheets behind her or whatever. But the type of yellow they use is almost like the color of an egg yolk. And I thought, well, that ties in, right? Egg, fertility, Anyway, I think that's an important part of the success of all three of those movies, the Rosemary's Baby, The Exorcist, and The Omen, is that it starts with these attractive young couples seemingly entering into a new life where they're going to be successful and happy, and their kid and Satan somehow fucks them up. Satan either gets into their kid, or their kid turns out to be Satan.
Satan,
And I don't think these stories would work if it was like working class people like me, because that environment isn't attractive to people. We like the scenes in Rosemary's Baby where she's walking along all those streets in Manhattan, looking at like Berghoff Goodman, looking at the nativity displays. All that it feels like this is so exciting. This is like the center of the world. That's a much more interesting environment to put a horror story like this than, someplace out in Staten Island or Queens.
Right.
So I think that's an important part of the success of this movie, and the reason why it's so rewatchable. He also gets into that feeling that almost every person when they're young must have when they first move into a new place is, who do you trust? How do you get along with your neighbors? Can you trust these old people?
Right.
Because if you're a young person and you're taking a step like that and you're moving into a new apartment, you always have old folks that are trying to help you and trying to give you the benefit of their experience. And obviously, in this case, it doesn't work out too well. But that's something that any person, has experienced at some point in their lives, where they have to wonder how much they should allow this person to be an advisor. How much should they? And actually, the Guy and Rosemary have two, right? They have the Castevets, and they have Hutch.
Yeah.
They should have listened to Hutch.
Right.
But then on the other hand, you have to say, this isn't really a sad story ultimately. I mean, I think that one of the things that Ira Levin is trying to put across is the idea that even in the worst situation, even when you're dealing with the primary force of evil in the world, Satan, humanity will still come through.
Right. Yeah.
At the end, she still wants to be a mother to the kid. And some people might say, "Oh, you say, what's that?" It's like she's adopting, but she isn't. She just wants to. She's just being a mother, which is
Yeah.
a reassuring thing. I think that even in the apocalypse, even when everything is going to hell, literally, mothers will still feel affection and concern for their children. And we all have mothers, so we should hope that that
Yeah.
always remains true. Right? So I think that's an important part of also that feeling of, which is not something that everybody experiences, that a feeling of first being in the big city, first learning the ropes of how to get along in a big city, a big city existence.
Right.
And you see the good and the bad. You see, like when they're first looking at the building, they're walking through the hall with Elijah Cook, our friend Elijah Cook,
Hmm.
leading the way, and they stop to look at the broken tiles in the hall. And that's an interesting thing about big city life, how you can be in the richest neighborhood and you're just a block away from what people would say is a slum.
Slum, yeah.
That willingness to accept your proximity to danger and poverty and ugliness, because you want to live, in this elegant, prosperous life. That's something that really is only true in the big city, right? I mean, only in Manhattan can you be walking in the richest neighborhood and see somebody taking a shit in the street.
Yeah.
That's the sort of thing that New Yorkers, after a while, they shrug. But for somebody first coming into that, learning to sort of accept the whole thing is part of what makes, I think, this movie kind of exciting and attractive to people.
Yeah, I mean, just and like you said, the setting. I mean, for me, watching this or all these other old '70s movies like that, New York, that for some reason I think I should have been born in New York. Like that's like I've been like I guess a fan of it ever since. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I always liked the look of it. And
There's something about the way they shot New York in the 70s, the 60s and the 70s.
yeah,
It never looked more New Yorkish. I mean,
right.
that sort of defined New York. And a lot of times it was really just taking the cameras out and shooting what was there. I think that was largely true of The French Connection, which I think is a film you watched recently,
Yep.
fairly recently. Uh, the idea was, and I wish filmmakers nowadays still followed this rule, you can add so much to your film just by taking your cameras out and seeing what's there. Take
Yeah.
advantage of what's already there. Don't try to fake it, right? And one of the things I thought was kind of sad about Eyes Wide Shut was that Kubrick insisted on building New York in England,
Yeah.
which I don't think, it's an interesting choice, and I love that film, but I still think it would have benefited quite a bit from actually being shot in New York. And he
Yeah.
was from the Bronx, so I don't know why he wasn't. Well, maybe because he was from the Bronx, he didn't want to come
He didn't
back.
want to do it there. Yeah.
He knew New York too well to want to come back. But and I guess in a way, Rosemary's Baby is echoed even as far out as Eyes Wide Shut, right? I mean, it's kind of a similar thing of
Yeah.
who can you trust, right? The secret cabal that's behind everything, right? You can't trust the person like Sidney Pollack in Eyes Wide Shut plays. A character is kind of similar to Ralph Bellamy's character, Dr. Saperstein in
Yeah.
this. A big, seems like an authority figure, seems like a man you can trust, a man with integrity. But he's got something funny going on the side, right? There's some mystery about him. And of course, in this movie, one of the advantages, which is also true of Eyes Wide Shut, is we're never really sure what exactly happened.
Yeah. You don't know.
You don't know, right? I mean, you can't. I mean, obviously they were a devil's cult. That much,
Yeah.
or a satanic cult. But whether or not they have the powers that they think they have, that's really left to could all be coincidence.
Yeah. I kind of like the way that the rape scene was basically a dream. So you're like, okay, did it happen that way? Did it not happen that way? You know what I'm saying?
Right? There's no way to know.
Was it the drugs and the pudding that made her see Satan, or
Yeah.
you know?
And I think that the secret of some of the best supernatural stories and ghost stories And it's true, I think, even of The Exorcist, as extreme as The Exorcist is, it could be read as being something that really is just being seen from a particular point of view.
Right.
Like, for instance, early in The Exorcist, we do actually get to see Father Damien's dreams. And later in the film, when those manifestations are occurring that are so extreme, with the girl's head spinning and things like that, we're seeing it from his point of view, right? So
Yeah.
it could be his hallucination. I mean, we assume it's his hallucination when he sees his mother in the bed, right?
Right. Yeah.
So in this case, with Rosemary's Baby, it's possible that this is all just the ultimate conclusions that she comes to are the result of her postpartum hysteria of some kind. Because when you start talking about hysteria, just using that word brings up another aspect of this, which is, Ira Levin was really ahead of his time. The message to women really in this movie is you can't trust men.
Yeah, that was another thing. And when I was watching it again today, was feminism and how husbands treat their wives and how society treats women, and she does that transformation of cutting her hair off.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So it's like now is she trying to be more like a man? Is she trying to move into like that sort of empowering status? But then you have all these people around her, they're just constantly beating her down.
Right. Everybody has more control over her than she has over herself. And all the men, even when they appear to be deferring to her, they're sort of giving her her opinion.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, when they're talking about the Pope and Roman Castevet, actually it's Minnie who says, "Oh, we're offending Rosemary because Rosemary is a Catholic."
Yeah.
Right? And Roman says, "Oh, you're not offended, or you're not a believer," or something like that. So in other words, the way he says it is, of course you're not. Right?
Yeah.
He's forcing the opinion on her. He's not saying, are you offended? He's saying, oh, of course you're not offended, are you?
Yeah.
Which is a way of sort of leading the witness in a way. And all through the movie, there is that sort of passive aggressive way of pushing their ideas. I mean, Guy is a charmer, and he frequently manages to get around some difficult situations just by using humor. He deflects anger, like, for instance, when she wakes up and she has scratches on her. Before she gets a chance to say, you raped me while I was knocked out,
he admits to it.
Right, and he focuses on his fingernails.
Yeah.
So, I know what you're going to be angry about. I trimmed them already.
Yeah.
And of course, that's not what she's going to be angry about at all. So he very cleverly, he's a good actor, he manages to move things to something that he has an answer for. And he makes a joke out of it, right? And he's always making a joke out of it when she says, I thought I was being having sex with, or being raped by some sort of devil or animal.
Yeah.
And he says, thanks a lot. That sort of way of constantly deflecting with humor and not allowing the person to ever really express themselves. And he also uses the other trick that people like that use, which is to admit and apologize before the other person has a chance to complain.
Yeah.
Like he does that whole business of bringing in the roses. I know I've been awful and blah, blah, blah. And of course, that's just a way of stopping her from expressing herself about how she feels about their relationship. So at every step along the way, she's dominated by the men. She's told how she should feel. She's told how she should think. When she begins to try to educate herself a little bit, they take the books away from her. Like Dr. Saperstein is one piece of advice to it.
Yeah, don't read books.
Don't read her books. She gets a book from Hutch that basically tells her everything she needs to know, right? And the guy throws it out, you know, takes it away from her and throws it out. When she says a perfectly reasonable request, she says, I want to go to Dr. Hill because I don't know if I can trust this Saperstein guy. And he says, I won't let you do it. Well, right?
Yeah,
It's not
and then
it's not fair to Dr. Saperstein.
yeah, and then when she does go to Dr. Hill, who for some reason I didn't realize till today was played by
Charles Grodin.
Charles Grodin.
First film role, I believe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
someone she thought she could trust. He also, no,
Right.
he's not part of the cult, but he as a man thinks, well, this woman's crazy. Let me call her husband.
And let's be honest. If we were in his position, we would probably do exactly the same thing, right? I mean, a woman you hardly know comes in and says that these devil worshippers want her baby.
Hmm.
You're aware from reading the literature that women do sometimes suffer uh, psychological or emotional problems as a result of the whole flood of weird chemicals that are going through their body when they're pregnant and when they're about to give birth. So he thinks, and you're talking about a guy, Saperstein, who's one of the most famous doctors. What is he, an obstetrician, I guess?
Yeah.
Most well known in the city. So, I mean, I never feel that badly towards Dr. Hill because I think he probably was just doing what he thought was
Yeah.
right.
But I mean, it's just for her, looking at it from her eyes, like somehow I thought I could trust, and
She's trapped, right? She's
I
absolutely
think
trapped.
that's the point where she just gave up. That was the point where it's just like, all right, I guess what's it called? It's the Stockholm Syndrome, I guess would have
She
set
becomes
in.
fine. Well,
Yeah.
that's another interesting thing. You mentioned the business with the hair. And I always wondered, even as a child, why they put that in there. I couldn't believe that it was just an opportunity to give publicity to Vidal
It's
Sassoon.
just like, yeah.
They did use his involvement to generate some publicity. As a matter of fact, while they were shooting the movie, he came to Paramount Studios and they did a photo session of him cutting her hair. For some reason, they shot these photos on a prize fighting ring set.
Huh.
I don't know. Maybe that was the only set that was
Yeah.
open and available. Anyway, turns out if you look at those photos, she already has that haircut. He's just sort of making believe like he's
Make
trying.
like it, yeah.
Turns out she had that haircut before, that hairstyle before she started shooting the movie. She was wearing a wig during the
During the opening
early part of
scenes.
it.
Okay.
So, but you start to think about it and you say, well, why did they do that? Why did they think, I mean, if she wore a wig, she could have wore the wig all through the movie.
Right.
So it didn't matter that Mia Farrow had decided to get that haircut. In Hollywood, whatever you decide to do with your hair is irrelevant.
Yeah.
So why did they do that? Now, some people could say, well, in the early part of the movie, she's wearing like pigtails and very girlish thing, very girlish look.
Yeah, she's still young and got a kid.
And then when she's pregnant with Satan's baby, she shows up and she looks like somebody that Charles Adams might have drawn.
Yeah.
Got the haircut, and she's got this terribly gaunt, pale face. She's even skinnier than she normally is.
Mm-hmm.
So why is that the only reason? Is that the main reason? Some people online that speculate that this is a callback to horizontal collaborators. I don't know if you've ever heard the term.
I don't guess.
After Second World War, there were a lot of women who had relationships with German soldiers during the occupation that were not held in high regard by their fellow French people. And one of the ways that they took their anger out on these women was to shave their heads publicly. They bring them out publicly and shave their heads. So there were some people that are speculating maybe that's what Roman Polanski was talking about here, because obviously he would have had some knowledge of World War II, and he would have had some knowledge of what went on. And there's a pretty well-known thing that this was happening in France after the war. Matter of fact, Hiroshima Mon Amour, which is a very famous film, the character in that is revealed at one point to have been shamed in that way by having her head shaved because she had a relationship with a German soldier. So this was something that was in the air in 66, 67, 68. It's in the book.
No, that's all I was going to ask you if it was in the book that she had cut her hair.
Well, he says that she went for a Vidal Sassoon haircut, but they don't describe to
Hmm.
that specifically, as far as I can remember. So the question still remains, why such a short haircut? Why make her look almost like a little boy? That's one possible explanation, that that they're making this connection like she's now a collaborator. And we do actually see her, while she's being fucked by Satan, we see her apologizing and begging
Yeah,
forgiveness from
to
the
the
Pope.
Pope. Yeah.
So maybe she sees herself mentally as a collaborator with the devil. And so she, in her mind, this is an appropriate thing for her to do, to cut her hair. But I think that what it really is uh, uh, she doesn't have control over anything in her life.
Right. Yeah.
So she's exercising control in a very visible way by changing one part of her appearance, right? And she's looking for something where she can say, this I can control. It's also probably true that a lot of women, especially young women, sometimes when they're going through depression or they have psychological or emotional problems, they might cut their hair or they might engage in self-harm, scarification and things like that,
Right.
cut themselves and things like that. So maybe that's what this is. But I would prefer to think that this is her way of asserting some control on the world.
Yeah.
She knows she looks like a ghost. She knows she can't get out from under Guy or Dr. Saperstein or the Pope, for that matter,
Yeah.
or Satan. So she's doing the one thing she can do to express herself and to say, I have some control over something. So that's my theory. But I guess it's an interesting thing. The fact that they do it in the movie and that they make a point of it is interesting. And it must mean something, because everything in this movie means
Yeah, and
something.
it's not. I mean, it's not like oh, you cut your hair, never mention it again.
No.
Everybody tells her in the movie
I,
that was
I,
a bad idea.
I,
Why did you do that?
well, personally, if I was in a situation, I shouldn't say if, I look, pretty haggard and ugly during the winter because, so if I had any hair, it might be a clever way to deflect attention from how awful you look
Yeah.
otherwise. So when people meet you and they say, "Oh, you look awful," say, "Oh, well, it'll grow back," without acknowledging the fact that you look like a corpse. But anyway, it's an interesting thing that's why I like this movie, because it has all
Yeah, it
those
has
little
so much.
things.
Yeah. I mean, read things about like before she gets pregnant, she wears all white and blues, which is like Mother
Virgin
Mary
Mary.
color. Yeah, Virgin Mary colors. And then, of course, after she gets pregnant, she's gets darker colors. She cuts her hair off, and
Right.
maybe the evil inside of her made her cut her hair, and that's why she looks all pale and white. And
Yeah, it's possible to interpret it a whole bunch of different ways, but they clearly are doing things with stuff like the color,
yeah,
right? Because you don't see much red in the film until Minnie and Roman invite them over. I mean, even the first time you see Minnie and Roman, they're in like whites and pinks and almost like Easter colors.
right.
But when they invite them over, if I remember correctly, Roman is almost entirely in red.
I believe so. Yeah,
So we have, for the first time in the movie, somebody wearing, pretty bright, or blood-like sanguine red, which is, I don't think accidental. Right?
yeah,
The little touches too, like for instance, I don't know if you noticed this, when Rosemary has been subdued after they catch her and they sedate her, and after she's had the baby and she's laying in bed and she wakes up and they're coming in, I guess the woman that's taking care of her, what's her name? Louise,
Louise.
Laura,
Yeah,
Laura,
Laura
Laura,
Louise. Yeah,
Laura Louise. Laura Louise calls them in, and as Dr. Saperstein and Guy are entering, Dr. Saperstein is doing this. And the first thing that Rosemary is saying, "Where's my baby?" And he's doing this.
yeah,
In a movie that has at least 3 mentions of people who eat babies,
babies. Yeah,
I thought that had to be intentional. I mean, in a way, it's signaling that he was off in another part of the apartment having a meal.
Yeah.
It wasn't really necessary. And it is funny that it comes right at that moment where she says, "Where's my baby?" And he's wiping his mouth like he just ate it. So all those little touches that can be interpreted, in ways that however people like to interpret them, that adds such depth to it. And it's so much more entertaining to go back to a movie like this, which I've gone back to probably 20 times in my life, to go back to a movie like this and consider all these different things rather than just having a movie where the big attraction is somebody getting their head cut off or somebody
Yeah.
getting disemboweled. How much can you really get out of that? And the funny thing is that that's pretty much what this movie led to.
Yeah.
It was like the other movies felt they had to outdo this one,
This one, yeah.
but
The, the
there's
only the only blood in this one is when the woman, I guess, commits suicide
right,
at the beginning and
right,
jumped off the. Of course, we know
right.
she was murdered, but
Yeah, that's an interesting question too. I assume that uh, Minnie and Roman are responsible for her death.
yeah, I took it as maybe she was gonna be the carrier of the baby, and then they move in, so they
Right.
maybe for
And
some.
they've had this problem before
Yeah,
because when Guy and Rosemary are first looking at the apartment and they're looking at uh, Mrs. I forget her name, the name of the character. We never see her. Mrs. Gardenia, Miss
hmm,
Gardenia. She's the woman that lived in that apartment before and
yeah,
was supposedly great friends of Minnie and Romans. So as they go into the apartment, she sees a little piece of her notebook, and it says something to the effect of, "It was all fun for a while, but I find I can no longer associate dot dot dot."
yeah,
Maybe she died right at that moment.
yeah,
It's like arg, right? That was just when they came, and of course, what it is, I find I can no longer associate myself with them, and she drags or has somebody drag the cabinet in front of the closet, which is the entrance to their apartment. So presumably they bumped her off one way or the other too. Uh, and of course they're responsible for, I mean, if we assume that they are actually empowered with the supernatural force of some kind,
yeah.
uh, we assume that they were responsible for the guy going blind and for
Hmm.
Hutch dying. So they were responsible for Miss Gardenia, for Terry, and we have to talk about the actress that played Terry. They're responsible for Hutch, Miss Gardenia, Terry, am I leaving it? And the guy going blind,
Yeah.
the actor going blind. So that's pretty good. Pretty good list of casualties,
Oh yeah.
but you don't see anything.
Nope.
And the only time in the subsequent movies where anybody exercised the same self-control was when William Friedkin decided not to show Reagan throwing the director out the window.
Right.
And I thought that was very smart because you really, in The Exorcist, you shouldn't see physical violence. There's a little at the end when he decides he wants to punch Satan out of it.
Yeah.
But it's not that type of movie. And so The Exorcist sort of gets a pass because it isn't a gore movie. It's a shock movie, but the shocks are not gore things.
Yeah.
In a way, you could say that the shocks in The Exorcist are uh, slight advances or considerable advances in terms of intensity from the shock scenes in Rosemary's Baby. The shock scenes in Rosemary's Baby pretty much limited to her being raped by the devil. That's probably the most explicit or shocking scene in the film. And
Right.
even that isn't really, I suppose in 1968,
It was probably pretty terrifying.
that was probably pretty,
It's
and there were a lot of people,
kind of mundane now.
oh, now it could be done on probably on network television.
Yeah. Of course, I'd mentioned to you before when we were talking about it, how I was saying how I thought that scene was kind of comical. Her reaction to it, oh, this is really happening,
Mhm.
and of course you mentioned, well, maybe because I was like, well, maybe William Castle had a hand in some of the comedy, but
Possibly. I don't know how much he was involved. He's in the film.
yeah, yeah,
He pops up for a cameo and
in the
behind,
phone booth.
right? But I have a feeling that probably Roman Polanski would have chased him off with a stick if he ever tried to. Yeah, he would have said, "Just show up for the publicity photos and then get your ass out of here." Uh, but the whole film really is a comedy in a way.
Yeah, I was watching again today. I was just like, it's not laugh out loud funny,
Right.
but it's sort of light. If you know
Yes.
what I'm saying, it's not like dark and dreary, and you feel through most of it, you're just like, oh, okay,
It presents evil as very charming.
yeah,
It's a
yeah.
it's a very pleasant type of evil person that we meet in this movie.
Of course,
Uh,
out of all the people, like the Minnie and Roman, the guy character, for some reason, I just didn't care for him. He was
you
like
know,
the big asshole of the whole satanic group.
well, I mean, he is certainly. You could say that Minnie and Roman they really believe in something, right? So
Right.
they're doing what they have to do to achieve this thing that they think is important.
Yeah, and guys just doing it for the money,
Guy is
for the
just
fame.
and the funny thing is, he says it. That's another thing in this movie. Very often, people say exactly the truth. They say it in a joking way, but it's the truth. Guy says on a couple of occasions how selfish he is, and
Yeah.
how selfish he's been, and he attributes that to being an actor, and he's absorbed in his role, and he wants to get his career going and all that. But really, he's an amoral person. He's somebody who doesn't care about. I mean, when you stop and think about it, it's pretty shocking. A guy is willing to actually sell his wife
To a
and his
satanic
child.
cult, yeah.
Well, that's pretty extraordinary. And we don't have to necessarily believe that it results in a satanic baby in order to believe that that may have happened. That he
Right.
may actually have made a deal with them. We never see the baby,
No.
and we only have Rosemary's word that there's something wrong with its eyes. So that could be a hallucination. You have that brief superimposition of the devil eyes that she
Hmm.
saw from her dream, but that isn't supposed to be the baby, presumably. That's,
Yeah.
so we never see the baby. We don't know what it's supposed to look like. That was an intentional thing. Roman Polanski said that he was a little disappointed when he read the book that there wasn't any real manifestation of the devil but I guess he realized that that is why it works. And that's why an
Hmm.
intelligent person can go back to this movie over and over and over again, because it isn't explicit in that way. All the films that came after, all the films that were influenced or inspired by it, always made it explicit. And that's why
Yeah.
we don't remember them, and we don't think as highly of them as this one, because it's left to one's imagination. And I'm not really one of those people that's always saying that you have to leave everything to the imagination.
Right. Yeah.
But I do think that there are some things that you can't portray in a movie without all the air going out of the thing.
Hmm.
It's not like in the X-Files. You never really should have seen the aliens.
Yeah.
That's as soon as that happens, it's like, oh, it's a guy in a suit. Right?
Hmm.
You know exactly how it's done. The makeup, prosthetics, or nowadays it would be CGI, and that all the mystery is lost. Right? All uh, the power of the thing is just sort of evaporates.
Yeah. I think if they would have shown some kind of puppet devil baby at the end of this movie, it would have destroyed it.
It would have been laughable. Right?
Yeah.
And those things always age poorly, right? I
Hmm.
mean, to be honest, as much as I'm a great fan of admirer of Dick Smith's makeup, some of the effects work in The Exorcist hasn't aged that well.
Right. Yeah.
The head clearly looks like something that's spinning around on the top of a mannequin.
Right.
It's not that we can't appreciate the cleverness of the people that did those effects. It's just that special effects are kind of like magic tricks. Once you've seen it,
Yeah.
the effect is lost, and then you spend all your time when you see it again, spend all your time trying to figure out
Figure
where
out
the seams are,
yeah.
how is it done, and that's not the effect you want to have when you're making a movie like this. You don't want people sitting there thinking, "Gee, I wonder how they did that."
Yeah.
You want the audience to be in the story, right? Completely emotionally involved in the story, not thinking about where the rods are for the
Yeah.
monster's arms or whatever.
Yeah. By not showing the devil baby, it's better because you can just imagine
Right,
what's in that crib
right.
and make it worse than anything they could have done
Right. It's not
practically.
very unlikely that they could have ever come up with anything as bad as what most people, and probably the people that objected to this movie, because it was a fairly controversial movie. It was a fairly controversial book.
Yeah. So when the book was written, that was like the beginning of satanic cults become like Anton LaVey and what's the other guy's name? Uh,
You're talking
the
about
the other the other Satanist. Aleister Crowley.
Aleister Crowley. Yeah, well, Aleister Crowley goes back to the 40s and the 30s, maybe even the 20s. But yeah, there was a revival of interest in Satanism and the occult right around this time. Ira Levin, who was Jewish, but he was an atheist. And I have to admit, I have much more respect for him because he said in interviews subsequently that he was sorry that he set all this off because he saw that what had happened. It was something we talked about in our Exorcist show and in our Roman show, that the success of these movies and books got a lot of people thinking that the devil was a real force in the world. Ira Levin didn't believe in the devil. At one point, he was considering having the menace in the story be aliens.
Right.
He figured alien impregnation is just as good as a satanic impregnation. Unfortunately, they had already done something like that. And the Village of the Damned.
Right. Yeah.
About children who are, I guess, spawn of aliens or under the influence of aliens. So that wasn't, and I'm glad he didn't do that. Because I think with one thing, and I'm an atheist, I don't believe in the devil. I don't think he's a force in the world. I'm sorry that there are people that are so gullible that they believe that shit. But I have to admit, there's something inside of all of us that does sort of believe it. And when you do a movie like this and you do it effectively, that it's like an icy finger touching that part of you that never goes away. You always think that, well, maybe there is, maybe there is a devil, maybe there is. Could there be something to this? And that's that when these movies are successful, it brings out that sort of animal side of us that's afraid of the unknowable, afraid of evil as a force, afraid of the darkness. The same thing. We talk about primitive cultures and we talk about how superstitious they were, and that was true in the West. Up until fairly recently, I mean, they were still executing witches in 1700s. I forget when they stopped. And even to this day, I mean, I think I just saw some story recently about some politician, a Republican naturally, claiming that somebody had criticized him as a witch.
Yeah, witches in his church. I saw that.
And they know better, of course. They don't.
Yeah.
But they know if they use that sort of terminology, there's a whole bunch of folks in their audience that are going to say, "Oh my God, a witch? Really? You got a witch?" So people are still responsive to that, and it has to be, to a certain extent, laid at the feet of, people like Ira Levin, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I think William Peter Blatty more than anybody, because it wasn't, in his case, it wasn't just, I want to tell a great story, and this is the one I came up with. He really intentionally wanted to reintroduce the devil as a force in the world that everybody should be afraid of.
Right.
And that whole movie is about, don't leave the window open, right? Figuratively speaking, to the devil. Don't let your children, be infected by the devil, because this is what can happen. And that was, a pernicious message. But it sure was successful. Made him a wealthy man, and it spread. And now we are living in the world that, there's still some folks that really think all that mumbo jumbo in The Omen is out of the Bible.
Yeah.
It isn't. It's also made it all up. And he's another one that said basically, that was just a gig. I just did it because somebody said we want to do something like The Exorcist. We want to make money. And so he came up with something. But Ira Levin was at least willing to, he was a good enough man, he had enough integrity to feel bad.
Right.
But for all of that, it's still, I think the film is probably close to being a perfect film, if such a thing.
Oh yeah, I love it.
It's hard to find anything in it that isn't, just right.
For some reason, after I watched it today, I was thinking back, I was like, is there no music in this movie? Because I don't remember any music. And I think it's just so beautifully shot that I'm not even caring about the music.
Well, also the music fits in so well with the scenes that you would really miss it if it wasn't there, but you're not really conscious of it while you're watching.
Right. Yeah.
It isn't a movie that's heavy with music, but the music that they choose is very effective. Like they have the little lullaby at the beginning, the la 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 la, and the guy who wrote it Christoph, what was his name? Christoph Komeda. Unfortunately, he died fairly young. He died, I think, just a few years after he did Rosemary's Baby. And that score is available, and it's quite a haunting score. But it's haunting because it has it touches that idea in horror that some of the most disturbing things are things that have a sort of childlike quality to them. That there's not really, and this is something that the Italian horror filmmakers really went off on a tangent with. There's really nothing more disturbing than a ghost that's a child, right?
Right, yeah.
Or hearing a child singing and you realize it's a ghost. It's really haunting because we don't associate children's lullabies with horror normally. It's jarring, but very effectively used in this movie. And they have a lot of very strange sounding music as well. I don't know if we call it atonal music or discordant music or I guess modern music.
Yeah.
But it's very effectively used. I mentioned the actress who played Terry Gianfrio. Terry Gianfrio is the girl that Mia Farrow meets in the basement when she's doing the laundry. That's the name of the character, Terry. And it's played by Victoria Vetri. Victoria Vetri was also in When Dinosaurs Ruled the Earth, and she was appeared in a lot of TV shows right around that time. The Man from U.N.C.L.E. Some people think she was in Star Trek. She wasn't, but she was in a lot of TV, and she was, I guess, well known enough so that when Rosemary meets her in the basement, she says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I was staring. I thought you were that actress, Victoria Vetri." And Victoria Vetri was credited in the movie as Angela Dorian. That's the credit she receives in Rosemary's Baby. Angela Dorian is the name that she used when she was a playmate, a Playboy Playmate of the Month. So this gets really complicated, right?
Yeah. So
Victoria Vetri plays Terry. She's mistaken for Victoria Vetri and says she's not her. And in the credits, she's listed as Angela Dorian. Now, that's strange enough for one movie. That character quickly leaves the scene. She kills herself or Castavet's killer. But what's more interesting is what happens afterwards. And I don't want to dwell too much on the horrors of the Sharon Tate thing, the Manson thing, although you're probably pretty familiar with it from the Quentin Tarantino movie.
Oh, yeah.
Victoria Vetri was a friend of Sharon Tate's. Victoria Vetri was supposed to be at the house where Sharon Tate was murdered when the Manson family invaded. And the Manson family were also, to some extent, interested in Satanism or something like that, at least that they had, that they talked about that sort of stuff, the trappings of it. And apparently this greatly affected Victoria Vetri. She started to suffer anxiety at the thought of even leaving her house to go to auditions and things like that. So her career really suffered. And as recently as, 2011? She had some sort of episode where she thought her husband was Charles Manson, and she shot him. For some reason, I don't know, she didn't have a good lawyer. She wasn't able to use the defense of temporary insanity. They put her in jail for 7 years. And she only got out, I think, fairly recently, maybe as recently as 2019. And she's now doing the horror movie convention circuit. And she has quite a few horror, in addition to Rosemary's Baby, she has quite a few horror credits. It's quite, the years have not been kind to her.
Right.
But I would love to see somebody in the film industry give this woman a role.
Yeah.
Because she says she's willing to act, and if she's willing to act and she's able to, she's at the age now and she has the appearance now where she could play a character like Ruth Gordon's character in this. So hopefully, unless she's incapacitated in some way, hopefully she'll have an opportunity to make up for all those lost years because that whole thing is a terrible tragedy. The whole Manson thing. It's just shocking what happened there, and that so many. Sharon Tate actually was up for the role of Rosemary. So that sort of hangs on this movie. There's a lot of people that talk about this movie the way they talk about The Exorcist, that it's
Yeah,
cursed,
like a curse of it. Yeah.
which is all bullshit. But there's certainly, if you follow anybody's story long enough, you're going to find some tragedy, and that's true of the people in this movie as well. Ruth Gordon is an exception. Ruth Gordon is,
Yeah.
along with John Cassavetes, are two actors that were in Columbo, which is a
Right.
spotting Columbo guest stars. She actually did one of the best Columbos, in my opinion. Her episode, Try and Catch Me, is an absolute corker, and she's brilliant in it. And Peter Falk is bringing his A game to it. It's one of the best, and it's one, like Rosemary's Baby, it's when you can watch over and over again and always enjoy. And Ruth Gordon had an extraordinary life. She was in silent movies. She was an extra in silent movies, and she went on and married, I forget the guy's name. He was a fairly famous screenwriter. I keep referring to my notes here because there's so much shit to read.
Yeah, I've got
to
notes
remember.
here too. Yeah.
Gaussen Kanan. Gaussen Kanan and her wrote Adam's Rib, which was, I think they won the Oscar for, or they were nominated. I think they won. That was one of the famous Spencer Tracy, Katharine Hepburn comedies at the time. So she was an actress, and she was a successful screenwriter at a time when really there weren't that many successful women screenwriters.
Right.
And she had an acting career that lasted, I guess she was in her 80s when she died. And she apparently was going about her normal routine right up to the day she died.
Right. She was brilliant in this movie.
Really impressive.
Just seems like a real, seemed like a real person.
Seemed like
yes. Like I probably know people that.
I know people like that.
Yeah.
And I like the fact that they didn't. It would have been very easy to say, well, all these people have to be sort of upper crust types.
Yeah.
But she's kind of a vulgar, common person, right? I mean, you could see the way she uses a knife and fork, or the fork in her mouth when she's eating. She is more like a working class character, but that makes her seem even more real,
Yeah.
Because it adds to the complexity of the whole thing. There's nothing predictable about the world that Rosemary finds herself in here. You can't peg anybody, really. Everybody seems different from what you might expect. But yeah, she's great in it, and there's so many, and it would have been very easy playing a character like that and trying to get the humor. It'd be very easy to turn it into a caricature.
Yeah.
But you see, a lot of the scenes, it's very casual. Ruth Gordon isn't going for the jokes. She's not trying to nail the gags. Some of the stuff she's rushing through, and has a conversational quality to it that makes it work. And it makes it funnier because it sounds like a conversation with a real person. There's a lot of scenes in the movie because Roman Polanski apparently had this idea that he wanted to make sure that it could all be thought of as being Rosemary's hallucination or delusion. Right. So you see a lot of scenes where there are people in other rooms. We don't even see their faces. We see they're talking on the phone, or quite a few shots in that. There's a very famous shot where Rosemary looks in on the first night they're with Minnie and Roman, and she and Minnie are in the kitchen, and Minnie is cleaning out glass with some sort of implement, and Rosemary looks towards the living room, and she just sees a little puff of smoke. Right? So they're sitting in there talking about something, and we just see a little smoke coming from their cigars or cigarettes. That almost reminds me of the little touch in Rear Window, where you just see a little pinpoint of light of Raymond Burr's cigarette when he's sitting in his apartment. That's how we know he's in there. Yeah. But that's so important because you don't want a scene where you actually have Guy receive this proposition.
Right, yeah.
So it's been very difficult to stage that in a convincing way. It has to be done off screen. But also you want to do it so that we don't know. It has to be from Rosemary's point of view, right? So we can have a scene where Roman is leaning over and saying, Guy, I have a little proposal for you. because that would take all the suspense out of the movie. That has to be left to the end.
Right.
So, but it does give you also that feeling of elegance that so the whole movie seems so simple and refined and careful, but at the same time, there's a spontaneity to it that makes it real. It's not like nowadays when you see some of these filmmakers that are doing horror movies that they want to appear to be art films, like elevated horror. I think our sadly departed friend Eric Myers, he mentioned in one of the episodes that we did with him about his disdain for this new wave of elevated horror.
Yeah.
And the problem with it is it seems too calculated. It seems too planned. In this, it seems spontaneous. Just the fact that you would have a shot of a room where you can't really see the person who's talking, right? It's like it almost has a documentary quality to it because it's not carefully set up so you can see exactly what's going on.
Right. Yeah.
It's shot the way if a camera was there and it just turned towards the door, that's what it would see. And that spontaneity makes the whole thing seem more real. It makes it so much easier to believe that this might actually be happening.
Yeah. I think so I've seen this one obviously, and I believe the only other Polanski film I've seen is some vampire comedy that he wrote or
Realistic vampire
directed.
killers.
Yeah, yeah. But so, and two different directing styles is from what I remember from the other vampire movie. But what I liked about this one was at the beginning, after the opening credits, it's going over the city with the titles and all that. When we first see Rosemary and Guy, they're walking towards the camera. The camera's sitting there.
Right.
And, now we're meeting them, so they're coming towards us.
Right.
With the what's his name?
Elijah Cook.
Yeah, yeah. He's bringing them to us. And then once they get inside the building, every shot is tight, close ups. You know what I'm saying? And it's almost like claustrophobic or that. I really like the way he done that.
Yeah, and a lot of long takes.
Long takes, yeah.
It's not a lot of rapid cutting. Yeah, he knew what he was doing. Well, Phyllis Vampire Killers was meant to be like a parody of the Hammer films, which were very popular at that time. So it's probably not representative of Roman Polanski's best work.
Yeah.
It's an interesting film. I tend to dislike the Roman Polanski movies that Roman Polanski appears in himself.
Yeah.
I don't think he's a particularly skilled comedian. Maybe he thought he was like a new Jerry Lewis. I don't know. But anyway, Repulsion is an excellent film. And that's a very disturbing film. So that's one you should seek out. Cul-de-sac, I thought was a very interesting film. He did another movie called The Tenant that he appeared in, and maybe I'll make an exception with The Tenant. That's one film that I think is worth seeing, even though he's the star of it. I mean, he did Chinatown. So I guess Rosemary's Baby and Chinatown, those are the films, that he'll probably be remembered for. And the skill that he shows in both of those films in being able to tell a fairly complex story without doing a lot of crazy shit with the camera. I mean, does interesting stuff with the camera, but it's not showy. And Chinatown, like this film, it's really a dialogue heavy film, but it doesn't seem that way, right? I mean, I never heard anybody say I didn't like Rosemary's Baby because it was just talk.
Yeah.
But it was really. I mean, it could be done as a radio show pretty easily, right? So that ability to use the camera in such a way so that it doesn't get in the way of dialogue scenes, doesn't look like you're showing off, like you're trying to distract from the fact that it's a lot of dialogue,
right?
Which a lot of directors nowadays, I think, would have a tendency to do.
Yeah, he done something, and he done some stuff in this movie, which I know you had talked about previously, because in our last episode, we were talking about French Connection. You were talking about how the documentary style, where the camera doesn't know where we're going yet, so the camera shouldn't be ahead of you. And there was scenes where like Minnie would come into the apartment, and the camera would have to chase her. Where's she going? Because she's just let herself in and going wherever she wants in this woman's apartment without asking. And it's like the camera's trying to keep up with her. She's going back here, then she got to come this way. I thought that was really good.
And I actually I didn't realize that I had Francois Truffaut and Alfred Hitchcock on my side on that question, because in one of their interviews that I read, it jumped out at me because we had talked about that on a previous episode. Francois Truffaut was making the same point in his interview with Hitchcock, that the camera can't anticipate what, like in the example he uses is they have a shot of somebody sitting, and then at a certain point they get up, and before they get up, the camera goes back to a wide shot. So you can't do that because that's telling the audience that this person's about to stand up. And in horror movies, it's particularly destructive because you don't want people to be able to easily guess what's going to happen next.
Right.
The main reason people watch a movie like this is because they're interested. What's going to happen? Right? What's going to happen next? And as going for that documentary effect, apparently Roman Polanski had designed his own camera rig for handheld camera shots. Some of the documentaries that have been done about the making of the film, they show the rig that he had created, which rested on the cameraman's shoulders, and because they were using big cameras back then. The scene where Rosemary is sort of blindly roaming into traffic.
Yeah.
The story that we're told, I don't know if we can believe this or not, the story that we're told is that Roman Polanski actually convinced Mia Farrow to just walk out into traffic. Now, I would find that hard to believe nowadays, but back then...
They probably would have done it, yeah.
Especially when you know what William Friedkin did with the French Connection, right?
Yeah.
With the train car chase scene and that, which apparently at least parts of it were not planned out.
They didn't shut the street down or anything. Yeah.
So it's possible. Apparently, Roman Polanski convinced her to just walk out in traffic. He said, "You got your big belly. Nobody's going to run over a pregnant lady."
Right.
And the only problem was that the cameraman wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
So that's the one scene in the film where Roman Polanski is shooting it.
Now in Midnight Cowboy, when they're walking across the street, I'm walking here. That scene, that was an ad lib too, right? It wasn't planned. I think that whole dialogue between him and the car driver, I think it was all ad lib because they didn't plan it out.
Well, I could believe it. That was the approach that a lot of those filmmakers were taking at the time, is try to get as close to reality as possible.
Almost like guerrilla filmmaking.
Yeah, and taking advantage of the things that happen, the things that go wrong on the set, right? The things. I mean, Francis Ford Coppola said this as well about why they shot actually in New York for The Godfather. And there was a lot of problems, and they had people protesting, and I guess the Italian American organizations were protesting, and the neighborhood was protesting because they had to, the film company had to take the TV antennas down from the buildings that were visible in the shots. And the question was, why go through all this trouble? Why not fake it on a studio backlot? And he said, because there's always stuff that happens in the street.
Yeah.
That you can't plan. You can't plan it out. It would seem contrived. If it happens in the moment, then it doesn't seem contrived, right? I mean, that part is mine. That's not Francis Ford Coppola. But his goal was to try to get the energy from shooting in a real place.
Right.
All the details that you see. We talked about this actually in Bloodbeat. How the fact that they shot in a real house made the film so much more enjoyable to watch because it gave it a level of realism, a verisimilitude that you wouldn't get if they were shooting on a set. And I think that in the 80s, when the VHS rental business became so important, and companies like Empire and Roger Corman's company, they started to buy buildings where they could establish standing sets and studio environment, so they could just churn these things out.
Right.
None of those movies are any good because they look like bad studio films. They remind me of the way that the independent filmmakers that were working back in the 30s, 40s, they would rent these sort of low quality studios like the Poverty Row Studios. Ed Wood did this with what was the name of the studio?
Quality Studio.
Quality Studio. So in that case, it was, well, we can't shoot movies on the street. It wasn't feasible at that time with the types of cameras they were using and all. So everything had to be shot on a studio set, and it was just a question of how much studio set can you afford?
Right, yeah.
And those low budget productions, those independent productions, they always ended up on these sort of chintzy, cheesy looking sets that make the movie seem, lousy and fake. And in the 50s, after the Second World War and while the Korean War was going on, because of the developments of 16 millimeter cameras that were being used for newsreel stuff. And they had newsreel photographers in battle scenes or,
Right. Yeah.
following the troops. All the development of that technology came home, and it started to be used by documentary filmmakers, and then eventually people like John Cassavetes. And they actually, their early movies are almost like time capsules now. You feel like you're in those places.
Yeah.
Because you are. When you're watching those movies, you are in real places. Rosemary's Baby benefited from that for the exteriors, but they shot all the interiors on studios.
Yeah. It still looked good though. It looked good though.
Oh yeah, they did a very good job matching it up. Yeah. So.
And of course, shooting on the street, like actually filming on the street, that helped it out too. So
it makes the thing work. If they tried to fake that, it probably, it would have really damaged the film.
Right.
Although interesting, if you actually step through the film, if you have a file of it, or you have a Blu-ray or whatever, and you try to find all the scenes in New York, you don't see that many. You don't see that many that show recognizable stuff behind them.
Yeah.
Like I was looking, there's a scene after Guy and Rosemary have looked at the apartment. They're walking down the block, and they're discussing whether or not they should take the place. Now that block that they're walking on is the block I lived on. So naturally, I'm looking to see it right in front. And you can't, because there's 2 fucking buses parked, right? And you don't get past the buses until almost the end of the scene, and then you see a store or restaurant called the Californian, which was long gone. I wasn't even able to find any reference to that place online. It's like it never existed. So it's interesting for that. You get these little things that that don't exist anymore. It's like a record of that time, of that street at that time. But it's location shooting, I think, for horror movies is, you could debate whether or not this really is a horror movie. I would say it is. I'd say it's a particular type of horror movie.
Yeah.
That is very subtle, and it's probably in the long run more effective than more explicit horror movies.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, I can't think of any really explicit horror movie that I like as much as this. This doesn't have any real violence. Doesn't even have the threat of violence. It was only in this time that I watched it that I finally understood what Laura Louise is saying at the end, when Rosemary starts saying, "Oh God, oh God," and she says, "Shut up about your God. We'll kill you, milk or not."
Yeah.
I never heard her say that before. I never heard that part where she says, "We'll kill you." That is probably the only instance in the movie where they actually
threaten her.
Threat.
Yeah.
And of course, she's quickly shut up. She's quickly put down by Roman and Minnie. They push her out of the way. She's the only one that doesn't have the sense to realize that they want to win Rosemary over to be the child's mother. But that's the only explicit threat of death in the movie. So that's unusual for a horror movie.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Well, I guess if we could make a contrast to Rosemary and what she was going through, and Mia Farrow, because she was dating one of our favorite people, or married to one of our favorite people.
Yes,
Sinatra at the
that's
time.
Right. That actually was something I had written down in my notes.
Yeah, and he wanted
another man dominating.
Yeah, he wanted her to, you come do my movie, The Detective, or you divorce me. And of course, she stood her ground and decided to stay on what I guess was the better movie.
Yeah, well, apparently Roman Polanski and William Castle, I guess, convinced her that this is much better for your career than The Detective, and they sure turned out to be right on that. I don't think she got an Oscar nomination for a performance, but the movie got a couple of Oscar nominations, and the movie is now, it's in the National Registry of Films.
Right, yeah.
So it's widely regarded as one of the great American films. Certainly the great one of that period. That was at a time, that was a fantastic year for horror fans and science fiction fans. You have Night of the Living Dead and 2001: A Space Odyssey, and you also have Rosemary's Baby. And they were all out the same year. That's really extraordinary. And if you're a Beatles fan, you got the Yellow Submarine coming out.
I believe, I I believe Rosemary's Baby and the Detective came out the same day.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, who ended up with her part, I wonder?
I can't remember.
Now, the detective, isn't that the thing that
That's
John McCain, right?
yeah, the John McCaine character
Right, right.
or McClane.
From
Yeah,
John
Die Hard
McClane, yes, from
from
Die
Die
Hard.
Hard. Yeah,
But we talked about that in a previous episode as
you're
well, that
right. Yeah,
Bruce Willis ended up playing the part that Frank
Frank
Sinatra
Sinatra
had
should have played.
first refusal on.
Yeah,
Frank Sinatra wasn't so crazy that he would actually try to play an action. I guess at that point he was probably in his 70s, right?
probably. Yeah,
So he probably, but yeah, it's an interesting thing that you have a movie about a woman who is dominated by her husband, by her doctor, by the Pope, by her church, her belief in uh, Catholicism.
hmm
Everything is about repression and keeping her down and trying to make her happy to be kept down, trying to make her content to be dominated by everybody. And while she's making the movie, she's got Frank Sinatra saying, "You do it my way." He's the
yeah,
my way guy.
right. Yeah,
But yeah, that is extraordinary. I guess he didn't read the script.
I don't
Say,
guess he
Frank,
did.
say, Frank, you're doing the same thing. And he probably wouldn't have cared. But
He probably wouldn't have that.
no. But yeah, Mia Farrow then and now is an eccentric personality. So we don't know why. I thought it was interesting in hearing her talk, and there's a documentary that was shot at the time, one of these little behind the scenes things that they used to do called Mia and Roman. And you see her behaving fairly eccentrically. She's very much into the sort of hippie-ish flower children type things, painting her. She has like a little cabin or something where she was her dressing room, I guess,
Right. Yeah.
or a what do they call a Winnebago or whatever, and she's painting with flowers and everything and encouraging everybody else. She talks about this strange thing about how she came up with a list of all the people who were working on the film, and she would put a gold star, and if they were nice to her, they'd put a gold star or put a black dot next to their name if they were mean to her, which I thought didn't sound like an adult human being talking.
Right.
And Roman Polanski apparently sort of played with her. He came up with his own list, and he would put gold stars if she had done certain things in the film, right? If he was getting the performance that he wanted from her. But that whole stuff sounds weird to me. That doesn't sound like normal stuff. She also talks about collecting cats and horses and I don't know, other animals, other pets. And it made me think, this sounds troublingly similar to the person she later became when she started collecting children as if they were pets.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I have to admit that this is the one unpleasant aspect of Rosemary's Baby. There are so many troubling people that are involved.
Yeah.
There's really no defense for Roman Polanski, and I wouldn't want to try to defend him. He's an admitted child molester, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
He had sex with a girl that he knew was 13, and not only is that against the law, but it's despicable, right?
Oh yeah.
And rather than being happy about the fact that he was able to escape justice and just living elsewhere, and he still is trying to get the case thrown out. I think as recently as a few years ago, he still had his lawyers trying to get the case overturned so he could come back to the United States. I mean, when you get lucky like that, if you're a child molester and you're lucky enough to escape jail, you should be happy with that. Right?
Yeah.
You were able to go on and continue your career, and that would have been a career-destroying thing for most people. He was able to go on and continue to make Oscar-winning films that made plenty of money, and his reputation as a filmmaker certainly is beyond reproach. But as a person, not so hot. I mean, I can understand people who say I can't watch these movies because of who was involved. Because I feel similarly about Mia Farrow.
Right.
I don't think she's a good person. I think that she's a liar, and I think that we talked in the past, a lot of which we cut out because we don't want to get into that.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that when she passes away, we'll get the whole story.
Probably. Yeah.
But even then, she was behaving strangely. Like in this documentary, she's talking like a Beatle almost.
Mm-hmm.
And she had just spent time with the Beatles in India. So she seems to be the sort of person, and you see a little bit of it in Rosemary's character as well, where she sometimes talks in a sort of pretentious way. She's not supposed to be a particularly well-educated person. She's just an average gal, right?
Mm-hmm.
But she says things like, pain be gone, I will have no more of thee. Now, at first I thought that was a quote from Shakespeare, and I searched all over, couldn't
Couldn't find
find it.
it.
That's just, and I assume it was in the script. I don't think that,
Right. Yeah.
but the fact that that survived in the script, that they thought that it would sound right coming from Mia Farrow, suggests that she was somebody that looked like somebody would say something like that.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about you, but in my circle, if I said something like "pain be gone and I'll have no more of thee," I'd get some odd looks.
Oh yeah. Or laughed out of the room.
I laughed out of the room. Right? Yeah, at the very least, people would think you're a pretentious person.
Yeah. Or just being funny.
Or trying to be funny.
Yeah.
Doing your imitation of Mia Farrow.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. But when it comes to like movies and TV shows that are connected to anybody that done anything horrible, I don't feel like I feel like I should still be able to enjoy this movie. And there's other people that worked on it that you want to give, you know what I'm saying? You can't
oh yeah,
destroy everything everybody else done just because,
and it's such a good
bad
film.
people. Yeah.
Yeah, 2 minutes into the movie, I've forgotten that this is the Mia and Woody thing. I'm
Yeah.
just enjoying the movie, and I'm forgetting that it's Roman Polanski of Roman
Yeah.
Polanski.
I just keep thinking, oh, it's a William Castle movie.
Yes, it is ultimately William Castle that's responsible for this.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I understand we're having a documentary that's going to be coming out soon about Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin was somebody that married at least once, I think more than once, married children, basically.
Right, yeah.
And scandals that kept him out of Hollywood for some time, I think until the 60s when he came back to grab up an honorary Oscar. But it would be a shame if we stopped enjoying the work of brilliant people just because it turns out that people are shits.
Yeah.
And also, we have to understand, although this is no excuse, we have to understand that these people do operate in a world where morality and ethics are not really crystal clear.
Right, yeah.
And part of it is the way people enable them. Like if you see some of the excuses that Polanski's lawyers were offering for why he ended up raping a 13-year-old girl, you say, well, if I was a wealthy, famous person and I had people that were willing to make those sort of excuses for me, who knows how bad I'd become.
Right, yeah.
Everybody is willing to forgive your worst tendencies because you're a very brilliant filmmaker. And who knows what that would do to your personality. Especially if you have somebody like him who, I guess he escaped, I don't know if he lost family in the Second World War, and he obviously had a horrible tragedy when his wife was murdered, wife and child were murdered by the Manson family. So who knows how fucked up you can get.
Yeah.
But it's an example of how clueless he was about the image that he was putting over, that while he was out of jail, after he had spent some time in jail and then they let him go. And I guess it was while he was waiting to, oh, I remember what it was. He was shooting a movie at the time. He was doing a remake of Hurricane. And they asked the judge if he could go and finish the movie. And while he was on the set of the movie, he was photographed with his arms around young women.
Right.
So it's like, what are you thinking, man?
Yeah.
So, and it was almost as if he was asking them, maybe it's a self-destructive thing. I don't know.
Right.
Maybe like it's the judge is in the process of deciding whether or not you should go to jail for molesting a child. And there you are allowing people to take pictures of you with two young women, I mean, it boggles the mind. It certainly, this fascination with young women and children, certainly we see the same thing happening now with the Jeffrey Epstein case.
Right. Yeah.
All the people who destroyed themselves, Prince Andrew and Alan Dershowitz, all these people who destroyed their reputations by being associated with this man, who they must have known was doing these things.
Oh, you had to know it.
Yeah, I mean, that's just my guess. I know
Yeah.
Alan Dershowitz is a very litigious fellow. I don't know, but it's certainly what a reasonable person would think, that you would know that what Jeffrey Epstein is known for. I mean, I think Dershowitz actually served as his lawyer,
Right.
getting him out of the jams. Right? So it's not as if it was a mystery to him what was going on. Everybody who was involved with Jeffrey Epstein saw all the young girls that were around all the time. So I don't know what that is. I don't know why people would allow themselves to have their lives destroyed that way, why they would actively destroy
It's probably a
their
power
lives.
thing. They probably think I'm so big, nobody can touch me. You know what I'm saying? I get out of it.
That must be it. It's not working anymore, though.
No.
So it's an interesting thing. And all of this stuff does sort of come to mind when you sit down to watch a movie like Rosemary's Baby, because all the tragedies seem to have echoes, down through the years.
Right.
From Rosemary's Baby on, we've been all this strange Hollywood stuff. And I guess a lot of this, maybe all this sort of drama is what encouraged Tarantino to do his movie.
Right. Yeah.
I know he's a big fan of Rosemary's Baby.
Yep.
He speaks very highly of it.
So Patty Duke auditioned for the role and didn't get to play it. Lost it out to Mia Farrow, but she did come back in the sequel.
That's right. Yes.
Which I didn't get a chance to rewatch, and I don't really remember a lot about it.
It's not.
But I'm assuming it's not as good. Was it made for TV, or was it a?
It was made for TV. It might have received some theatrical release in Europe, but it was made for TV, and it was primarily done because it was done several years after Rosemary's Baby.
76.
Yeah. But I think it was done because the ratings for the TV screening of Rosemary's Baby were so high that they said, we got to do something to follow this up. And yeah, it is funny that Patty Duke came along for the second time. Ruth Gordon shows up in that.
Oh, does she? Okay.
I have great respect for her. I think she's terrific, but I sort of wish she had. Sidney Blackmere, who plays Roman, I think he might have been dead by that time. So he's replaced by, I guess, Ray Milland. And Ray Milland was available for anything. So
yeah.
he shows up in that as.
But it obviously has the kid now's grown up, right? Is that what it's? So now we're getting the Omen territory.
It's. I just saw. I had seen it years ago, and I didn't want to watch it again because I didn't want to spoil the taste of the original. But yeah, I sort of noticed that he ends up as like a rock star or some kind of, I assume he's not a go-go dancer, but there's some scenes in it where he's dancing around on the stage. So I assume that it's going down a similar path to what we saw in some other similar movies about satanic people when they grow up, or satanic babies when they grow up.
Yeah.
It's also similar in a way to the vampire Lestat, Anne Rice, who just passed away recently, another person who's died.
Yeah.
When she got Lestat up to present day, I guess it seemed unavoidable that a character like that would have to be a rock star. And maybe in the world of Look What's Happened to Rosemary's Baby, they made came to the same conclusion. I actually read Ira Levin's sequel novel, which Look What's Happened to Rosemary's Baby is not based on. He wrote his novel later. I think it came out in the 80s. And I got a hardcover copy of it because I was so eager I was such a fan of the original book.
Right.
It wasn't really very good, unfortunately. I think he probably at that point had pretty much peaked. But I forget what he had. I think he has Andrew or / Adrian as the leader of some sort of like a New Age cult or something like that. I forget the exact specifics of it. But it didn't really, and it also, interesting thing about the novel, spoilers for anybody who has gotten this far.
Yeah.
We've already given away a lot, but for Son of Rosemary, he suggests in the final chapter that the whole thing was a dream. And I think that's probably the point that I decided I didn't like that novel.
Right, yeah.
Because he suggests that he has Rosemary waking up in the apartment with Guy, and the whole business about her pregnancy and the devil cult is assumed to be a dream that she had, including right up to the events of that novel, Son of Rosemary. So that seemed to be a trick that was pretty popular back then. I know.
Yeah, it just seems like a cheap ending. Like, oh, I can't end this movie or
Well,
my script or my book. Oh, we'll just make it a dream.
they did it with Dallas,
Just do the
right?
Wizard of Oz thing, yeah.
Wizard of Oz,
Dallas, yeah.
Dallas, and Roseanne.
Yep.
Roseanne sort of disavowed the previous several seasons of her show
Yeah.
in the last episode of her show, and then of course they had to undo that when they came back on the air.
Yeah.
But yeah, the book, the sequel book isn't very good, and the sequel TV movie, it's not very good. Didn't see the TV series that NBC made fairly recently.
I didn't watch it either.
Yeah, I didn't see very good reviews of that. I don't really know what they were thinking, why they thought that they could really do better than the original. You know,
Yeah.
it's just not the sort of thing you can really improve on, you know.
Well, everybody thinks they can do better than the original. That's why we have so many remakes now.
But I mean, when the guy who came up with the thing can't do it better,
Yeah.
then why would you think, you know, you weren't even able to come up with the first one. Hey,
Yeah.
you're going to come along and this doesn't make sense, you know.
I think it's also like we talked before about, you know, trying to get a young person to watch classic Doctor Who or the Avengers. It's, you know, the remakes and stuff for today are for younger people. They're not for fans of the original. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah, maybe
It's not for us to enjoy. It's for younger people that aren't going to watch a movie from the 60s, so they'll watch an updated version of it.
Well, I'm saying to hear such people.
They're just not getting the best version.
I'm sorry to hear that there are such people in the world, but I guess if a remake encourages somebody to go back and watch the original, then maybe it serves some useful purpose. But Ira Levin wrote 2 more books that I guess were big hits. He wrote The Stepford Wives, which is similar to Rosemary's Baby, and made a very good film, not as good as Rosemary's Baby, but a very solid film with Catherine Ross, who I think probably was one of the most beautiful women that Hollywood ever discovered. And also Boys from Brazil, which is a movie I enjoy, but it's not a very good movie. It's kind of, I don't know how to describe it. It's schlock, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, it's like Ira Levin decided he was going to do the equivalent of They Saved Hitler's Brain.
Yeah.
You know, but it's an entertaining watch. You get to see people like Gregory Peck and Laurence Olivier in a fight to the death with Doberman pincers attacking them, and so that's fun. But Rosemary's Baby, I guess, is the thing that Ira Levin will always be remembered for, and I think he's pretty lucky that he has that on his.
Oh yeah.
You know, that's the biggie for him. Ira Levin's son was on a podcast recently that I heard, and he said that for a brief time, Ira Levin was living in an apartment an apartment building in a duplex on the ground floor, and the only other tenant in the building was Eleanor Roosevelt.
Really?
And Eleanor Roosevelt owned the building with somebody else. How Ira Levin managed to get in there, I don't know. But at a certain point, Eleanor decided that she wanted the ground floor as well. And so apparently Ira Levin's son has in his possession letters from Eleanor Roosevelt that sort of gently, nicely saying, it would be so nice if you weren't here.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say that Eleanor Roosevelt was going to try to use satanic cults to run the building.
Well, that was, I think, why Ira Levin's son, I forget his name, but he was suggesting that some of those scenes where they're having the gathering of these, this international gathering of people at the end, all the Satanists from all over the world, that was sort of inspired by the things that he witnessed when Eleanor Roosevelt was living there, because she lived there until the end of her life. And apparently foreign dignitaries would frequently come. So the place had a lot of important people going in and out of it.
Yeah.
So the suggestion is she wasn't quite Minnie Castevet, but she lived in a sort of environment that was similar to what the Castevets are living in. That she was sort of the center of this sort of international, world. But I thought that was interesting, and you don't see any other mention of that. I searched all over
Anywhere, yeah.
to find some connection between Ira Levin and Eleanor Roosevelt. It doesn't exist, but apparently it's true.
So Eleanor Roosevelt inspired Rosemary's Baby.
Yes, I guess you could say to a certain extent. I guess you could say that Eleanor Roosevelt was kind of a colorful character in the way that
Right.
was going, but she wasn't quite that type of colorful character.
Right.
She was a different type of colorful character, But Sidney Blackmere, I guess is the way you pronounce his name, the guy who plays Roman Castevet. And isn't it interesting that you have a movie that's one of the lead actors is John Cassavetes, and one of the characters' names is Castevet.
Right.
Another one of those strange little coincidences that happen. If it was a common name, it wouldn't be so weird, but Cassavetes is certainly not a
Well, I mean,
common name.
you got Roman as the director and the character.
That's right. Yeah, I never even thought of that. And that's actually from the book.
Because I think every time they kept saying the movie, I kept thinking, are they referring to Roman Polanski as like a character in the movie? Yeah.
Commenting on the director. Well, that's interesting. That hadn't occurred to me at all. I thought that I had run a fine-tooth comb over this film, but somehow that escaped me. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that we wanted to mention in this. Well, I think we probably covered it all. There apparently a lot of historical accuracy in it. There was a heat wave in '66. The Pope did visit at that time. So all of that is drawn from stuff that was actually going on at the time. And I guess that adds a lot to it as well. Elijah Cook added to his list of horror-related and fantasy-related things. He was in Salem's Lot, the '79 version. He was in The Night Stalker, the '77 film. He was in Batman, the TV show. He was on the original series of Star Trek. He was in The Man from U.N.C.L.E. He was in Wild Wild West. He was on The Fugitive. He was on The Untouchables. He was on Boris Karloff's Thriller. He was on, he was in House on Haunted Hill. We know that.
Yeah.
He was in Alfred Hitchcock Presents. He was in The Big Sleep and The Maltese Falcon, which aren't horror or fantasy, but important films. And he was also in Shane, the famous Western with Alan Ladd. So he had quite an amazing career, on a par with Ruth Gordon. And Sidney Blackmere apparently somehow managed to play Teddy Roosevelt in 6 different movies. It's an extraordinary thing. You go through his list of credits and it's like Teddy Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt. And the movies don't appear to be connected in any way. He just seemed to be the go-to guy.
Came back for that part, yeah.
But he's great in this movie. There's so much. So him and Ralph Bellamy, who's another guy who was in a lot of stuff. I think we talked about Ralph Bellamy before in regards to, what was it that we were talking about? Well, anyway, he's a well-established star. Did a lot of movies, and I guess later in his life he might have done television. I don't think he ever did Columbo, but the two of them are terrific. Their line readings are just perfect. There's a wit and a style to the way they say things that's just, very impressive, I think.
Oh yeah, I reckon. Okay, he was. I recognize him from Trading Places.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Yeah.
Later in his life. Yeah, Ralph Bellamy. I guess that was getting close to the end of his life when he did Trading Places, right?
Yeah.
And Sidney Blackmere, this was the next to last film. Rosemary's Baby was the next to last film that he did. Polanski seemed to want to populate the film with a lot of old-time Hollywood actors, not people that were like major stars, but people that had a lot of character because they had been around a long time. Like the woman that plays Laura Louise, apparently she had been in movies forever, playing supporting roles and things like that. And you probably know this, but the voice that Rosemary speaks to when she calls the actor that's gone blind, do you recognize him?
No, I didn't.
It's Tony Curtis.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Polanski got Curtis to do it because he knew that Mia Farrow would recognize the voice, but she wouldn't be able to place it, which would
Right.
turn out to
Yeah.
be the truth. And that the sort of, who is this that I'm talking to quality helps the performance in the scene.
Oh yeah.
Something to it. But we haven't mentioned Maurice Evans. And I think you being a big Planet of the Apes fan, I'm sure you probably should know Maurice Evans.
Yep.
He's Dr. Zayas.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what a cast, huh?
Yeah, I know.
Any movie that includes Dr. Zayas
is it gonna be a good movie? Yeah, but
it's
they're
really,
like you said. I mean, he got these old timey actors, but they're not so big that you pick up on. You know what I'm saying? You're not sitting there going, "Oh, look, I know him and I know him," and shit. It's really good. Really good characters.
It's funny how sometimes you get these old folks, you sort of pluck them from wherever they are in their career at that point, and they really are good.
Yeah.
All those years of working for the camera, it really pays off. It must have been delightful to work with a group of folks like that. So it's interesting. It's an interesting film just because you can spend hours going through the credits list of all the different roles that these actors played over the years.
Yeah.
I can't imagine it's fun to imagine what sort of conversations Ruth Gordon and Sidney Blackmer had, because they both started in silent movies and then did movies in Hollywood for years. I mean, Ruth Gordon wrote like 3 or 4 books about her experiences in Hollywood. That's how much she had to say.
Right. Yeah.
So she must have been a fun person to listen to. But yeah, it's a great movie. And I'm sure.
Well, I was gonna say that like it's obviously on top 100 lists for best films, but you don't hear a lot of people talking about it. You know what I'm saying? Like it's not like one of those everybody talks about it all the time or references it or anything, but it's still.
You know how you mentioned that you felt that there had been a resurgence of interest in Superman, the '78 film.
Yeah.
And of course, that's because we just did an episode about
That's what it was, yeah.
But it seems that sometimes that happens. And I think Rosemary's Baby went through that maybe about a decade ago. And the culmination of that resurgence of interest, and suddenly people would say, hey, this is a good movie, was the decision finally to do the
TV show, yeah.
So yeah, I think right now it's I mean, because you can only go on saying what a great movie it is for so long, and then people move on to something else.
Yeah.
But I think generally it's pretty well recognized as a great film and an important film in the history, certainly in the history of horror. But it's also important in that period of a new Hollywood,
right? Yeah.
With somebody like Roman Polanski coming to Hollywood, making his first film there, and having it be so good and having it be so successful. That that sort of gave the new Hollywood movement a boost.
Yeah, I feel like if I went to work tomorrow and asked 10 people if they've seen it, they would say no.
Oh, even worse, they probably say they saw the remake.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's disheartening. But then on the other hand, this is something that you can introduce to them, and they have something to look forward to, right? I mean, assuming it's a person who has some
interest in
taste and ability to appreciate something good. I'm sure that we shouldn't speak ill of folks that don't like this movie or aren't interested in it, because maybe they're interested in things that we don't appreciate. But it seems to me that one of the sad things about generations that have come along since my teen years is that when I was a teen and a child, I was obsessed with the stuff that came before. I was more interested in the things that came out in the 30s and 40s and 50s than I was interested in the stuff that was coming out at the time, and that changed as I got older. I started to pay more attention to the stuff that was actually in the theaters, because I became old enough to actually go to the theaters. Yeah. But it seems to me that you don't, like when I was a kid, so to speak, when I was in my teen years, there was a great resurgence of interest in the Marx Brothers and W.C. Fields and Buster Keaton and Harold Lloyd. And there was a great resurgence of interest in Humphrey Bogart movies and all those sort of Sam Spade and Philip Marlowe movies, the detective type movies like The Maltese Falcon and things like that. And that went on for a couple of years, and there were even movies that reflected that interest. There were movies made at the time, like
Right.
Woody Allen played Against Sam, which drew heavily on the nostalgia for Casablanca. And there was at least two Philip Marlowe movies that were done in the 70s with what's his name, Robert. Big star, the big star Robert.
Yeah.
The guy that's in Charles Lawton's movie, Night of the Hunter, Robert Mitchum.
Robert Mitchum, okay.
He played Philip Marlowe in two movies in the 70s, and there were a whole bunch of movies that were sort of like callbacks to the old detective movies. Robert Altman did The Long Goodbye, which actually was based on a Raymond Chandler novel. There were a lot of that. So I think I recommended to you recently Night Moves with Gene Hackman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Very definitely sort of a callback to the old style detective show. It's set in the modern day, but still it has that vibe to it. So there was a period there where the audience enthusiasm for old stuff was what was driving, to a certain extent, the movies and television shows that were being made at the time. I don't know if you see that so much anymore.
Nah.
I mean, in a way you do, because everything is fucking Star Wars. Right?
Yeah.
But that's not really quite the same thing, because they never stopped making those movies, really. I mean, that's been going on now for the past 30 years or however long it's been.
Yeah.
They had their little recess there for a while, but it's still a continuation, pretty much the same thing. Same thing is true of like Star Trek and the superhero shit. I mean, all that stuff is ongoing. And I don't think the audiences really see that as nostalgia, right?
Right, yeah.
They see that as just a continuation of something that they like.
Yeah, you can't be nostalgic about something that came out last year.
Right, yeah. And even like sometimes I run into young people now who tell me what a transformative event it was in their life when they went to see Star Wars when it was re-released in the 1990s.
Yeah.
20 years or whatever it was after it was first released. And that's fine. That's a perfectly legitimate reaction.
Oh, yeah.
I sort of feel like saying, it's too bad you weren't around the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that you've had to listen to me groan on about, is the fact that we don't really have anything that's specific to this time that's being made right now,
Yeah.
I mean, the big pop culture things are all things that refer to stuff from long in the past in many cases, Sherlock Holmes and Star Trek and Marvel Comics and Superman and all this stuff is all from the past, We don't really have anything, and even when they do something that's supposed to be futuristic, they make it look like a 1940s detective thing, like Blade Runner or its sequel, So I don't know where that leaves us, but
yeah. Well, if I could jerk you to a movie that I think would kind of go with what we're talking about here with Rosemary's Baby, that would be The Lords of Salem by Rob Zombie.
oh, I think
it's sort of based off of it, kind of the same storyline, but
is that his?
There's no baby in it, but
is that his homage to Rosemary's Baby?
That's what I would call it, or just an homage to the satanic cult movies of the time.
Well, I think it's great that somebody like him, we're talking about Rob Zombie, right?
Mm-hmm.
Somebody like him and Quentin Tarantino and Roman Polanski, they're all in agreement that this was great.
It's a great movie, yeah.
So that gives us some reason to hope, But I do think one lesson, and this is something that I've always tried to take away when I do my own stuff, one lesson that people should try to take away from Rosemary's Baby is to create a real world environment so that you have, when you introduce your supernatural or your horror element, there's some contrast there.
Yeah.
And instead of creating a world where everything seems like horror movie world, where everything is strangely colored or atmospheric, or create a world that is attractive and realistic, a world that people might actually want to escape into. And then when you introduce the horror element, it's that much more effective.
Yeah, it's more shocking because you're not expecting it.
Right. Because you're on the ride with Thorne and his wife when they're going to England, and he's going to be the ambassador.
Yeah.
And they have a whole new life ahead of them, and they're looking at this wonderful place they're going to be living. And then in the back of your mind, you say, "Oh yeah, but what about that that little kid that sort of hanging out there creates that feeling of suspense that is a great, counterpoint to our desire to see them be happy and successful. And the same is
Right.
true in The Exorcist, right? Chris McNeil looks like the world has embraced her. She's going to get a chance to direct, and then her kid has to start peeing on the carpet,
Yeah.
puking on priests.
Yeah.
So if you create, and I think that the world that they create in The Exorcist, that world that she's in, and also the way they show the Catholic Church, the priests and all, that is very romantic. It's very desirable. I mean, I have no interest in being around priests at all, especially what we know about them now.
Yeah. We're too old. Yeah, we're too old for them now.
They wouldn't be interested. But I have to admit, that was a very seductive world. It looks very attractive to be in.
When I watched this movie today, I was like, I want to live in that apartment.
Yeah.
That's a nice, even before they redecorated. The way the old lady had it. I'll take it just like that.
I felt the same way when they had that wide shot of the voice. Boy, I would love to live there.
Yeah, and that's probably what, $10,000 a month apartment nowadays.
Well, I know they said that when Eleanor Roosevelt died, the property that she had shared for that period of time with Ira Levin was valued at around $15 million.
Yeah.
And I don't even think that was a particularly big place. So, I imagine that, the Dakota, I mean, Oh, interesting thing. They call it what, the Bramford in the movie?
I think so, yeah.
Something like that, the Bramford. That's Ira Levin's tribute to Bram Stoker.
Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
That's where I get the idea from. and apparently the house that's in this photo, which was on the cover of some of the paperbacks early on, that's another similar. I don't think this is Dakota. This is a similar building, the Alwyn Towers, I think it's called, which still exists, and it's probably also vastly, expensive to live in or to live nearby. So that's one of the unfortunate things, and that's one of the things that makes that gives us one of the sort of sad and wistful feeling when you watch movies that are set in New York at that time, is that whole island is now like a amusement park for billionaires, and it's just not a welcoming place for. I mean, just the fact that Ira Levin's son can tell a story about his father before he was famous.
Yeah.
Living in the same building with Eleanor Roosevelt on the Upper East Side, that he would be able to afford that.
Yeah,
is extraordinary in itself. It's certainly a film I think we can give a strong recommendation to.
Oh yeah.
Anybody hasn't seen it, they should get the Blu-ray or find it on a streaming service and put it up on the biggest screen.
I found it on Hulu. I think it's the only place I really found it.
Yeah, well, that's and I assume the presentation was good.
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah,
well, for what you get over streaming, but on Blu-ray quality by far. But
well, I got a copy of. I don't know if it's the most recent Blu-ray version, but it was restored. And one of the things that I'm worried about when I see some of these restorations is it seems to me that they pump up the color a little too much.
Yeah.
And I think we've talked about on some of our other shows about this high dynamic range thing that they're doing.
They need to leave it alone.
Yeah, because
it's almost like they're like, oh, let's see if we can get rid of the grain. And I'm like, no, you don't.
That's the other thing, right?
Don't do that. Leave the grain.
Right. They can't say that this is the way the filmmaker originally intended it, because there's no way the filmmaker would have ever imagined that such a thing would be possible, to have a film without grain, or to have colors in the film that are so searing that your eyes are practically burned by them.
Right. Yeah.
That probably is going a step too far. But I assume as time goes by, there'll be a wave in the other direction where people start saying, we've seen what you can do with your computer to these old movies. Now let's see if we can get back to what they were when they were actually made. And of course, the movies as they were actually made, it's hard to say exactly how they looked, because back then it was a photochemical thing. So every print might have looked slightly different.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say, but definitely strong recommendation for Rosemary's Baby. And, it's a film that really, I relish every time I watch it as something new to enjoy and appreciate.
Yeah, it didn't feel dated at all.
No, if it's dated in just the right way.
Yeah.
It's this type of dating that I like.
Definitely held up though.
Yes, absolutely. So, I think that's probably all I can say about it for now, unless you have other thoughts.
I think I'm good on that one, on this one here.
And people can pursue their interest in IR11 either by reading the original novel, which I recommend, and I think he wrote an afterword to some of the more recent editions that were released before he passed away, that talk about how he regrets the business about Satanism catching
Yeah, I've
on.
seen one of the releases of the book had the stroller with the devil tail coming out of it.
Oh yeah.
That and there was one where there was a crucifix hanging from the top of the carriage,
Oh yes.
with the baby
Right.
arm coming up.
Yes. Yes. Well, they didn't go as far as It's Alive.
Yeah.
I guess that's an example. And I like Larry Cohen and I like his movies, and I liked It's Alive. But It's Alive is an example of somebody
How
taking it
can
the
we
wrong
rip
way.
this off? Yeah.
Going too far with it. But also Death Trap is an entertaining play. The movie is pretty good. Sidney Lumet made the movie with Michael Caine and Christopher Reeve. It's worth catching out. And The Stepford Wives, the book and the movie.
The movie is, yeah. Of course, that was remade too.
Yes, it
They
was a
remade that
disaster.
one.
Yes.
Actually saw that in the theater.
Oh, did you? Yeah.
Got dragged to it.
Were you the only one there?
There was, well, me and the two other people I was with.
Well, good of you to show up.
Yeah.
But I guess it was Frank Oz that did that one, right?
I think so, yeah.
He certainly speaks with regret about that whole experience. But that's an interesting film, maybe for another time. And The Boys from Brazil is worth watching too, just for laughs. It's sort of schlocky, a big budget schlock.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun, and it's fun to see Gregory Peck chewing the scenery along with Laurence Olivier chewing the scenery, as he always seems to do.
Yeah.
So those are two other IR11 things that I would give my recommendation to. I never saw Sliver, I guess, a movie that was based on one of his last books with Sharon Stone, I guess was the star.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that. It's been a while, but
that might be an example, and I haven't read it, so I can't say, but it might be an example of an author who has lived past his time. Son of
probably,
Rosemary.
yeah.
He's just not, he doesn't have his finger on the pulse anymore. Had his finger on the pulse when he did Rosemary's Baby.
Oh, yeah.
But with Sliver, maybe finally his
time passed, yeah.
His time has passed. Yeah. And I suppose that's true as well of Son of Rosemary. But I imagine he got a lot of money for doing it.
No, I'm sure he did, yeah.
That's always a good motivation.
Money's always good.
He said that as much as he regretted the Satanism thing that his novel kicked off, he never returned any of the checks.
Yeah.
So,
he didn't donate him to the church or anything.
No, he certainly wouldn't have done that because
yeah.
he didn't believe in any of that stuff. But it was interesting to see when you go back and read reviews at the time. It's interesting to see how controversial a lot of the stuff that they were doing in the movie and also the stuff that was in the book. IR11's son talks about finding a copy of Rosemary's Baby that had been sent to him by a reader that had been sent to IR11 while he was still alive, sometime after the book became a bestseller. And it was scrawled on the inside cover, you should have your head examined, you're sick. I wonder what it was about the book that could have said, I mean, to our eyes now, it doesn't seem that way, but somehow back at that time, anybody doing anything about Satan worshipers. Oh, that's the other film that came out in 1968, The Devil Rides Out.
Oh, yeah.
Hammer film. So there was a lot of devil stuff going on at the time.
Yeah, a lot of I guess a lot of music at the time too. Rolling Stones album, something in The Devil's Majesty or something like that was the name of the album.
Sympathy for the Devil.
Yeah.
Well,
and of course the Beatles. Everybody knows the Beatles were big Satanists.
I guess all of those top rock guys seemed to flirt with the occult for a while. David Bowie did as well, and usually it was probably maybe because of their interest in movies.
Yeah.
Maybe they were also influenced. I always thought it was kind of interesting that there was that sort of connection between Mia Farrow and the Beatles, and she's in Rosemary's Baby, and that involves Roman Polanski, and then on the other side you got John Lennon, and the Decoders.
Yeah, and then of course Charles Manson
Yeah,
was,
Charles Manson, right?
uh,
He took his inspiration from Helter Skelter, the Beatles
yeah,
music,
and he
and he
was
ends
mad
up
at
killing.
them because they wouldn't play his music or use his songs or something, and
Right.
he ends up killing Roman's wife.
Yeah, it's weird stuff. Yeah,
Yeah,
so it's a small world for crazy people.
yeah,
Small world of crazy people. Uh, but and of course, we're living in a world now that seems even more insane.
oh
So
yeah,
a lot of this stuff, not Sharon Tate's murder, of course, but a lot of this stuff seems very quaint in comparison to the insanity that's going on now.
yeah. I think that's why when I watch these, I'm like, that's where I need to be.
The past.
I need to be in 1960s New York.
I have a feeling that a lot of people who were living in 1960s and 70s New York were thinking, where I
I
need to
need
be
to
is
be, yeah,
1940s
yeah,
or the 1930s, if we can get back that far.
probably.
Where would you like to be now? You'd like to be in the 60s? You don't want to be in the 70s.
Uh, Probably the late 60s, early
Late
70s,
60s, yeah.
before disco, obviously.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. That time, like 67, 68, 69, that was a great time. It seems great now. Maybe it wasn't.
Yeah,
Didn't seem that great when I was
yeah.
going through it the
Like if I
first
go
time.
back here and be like, oh, okay, I made a mistake.
It's possible. Yes, let's not do anything rash.
Yeah,
Let's not travel back in time. Uh, but yeah, uh, it, it's a psychological thing, I guess,
yeah,
where the nostalgia is I won't say a disease or a disorder, but it does sort of influence your rationality and your logic.
right, yeah,
And so for me, anything I could do to get back to that time when when life was still relatively carefree and where the biggest sources of stress or anxiety was worrying about what's going to happen to Rosemary and
yeah.
in a movie. I would love to get back to that. Of course, it's impossible. So I guess the only thing that we could do to maybe help ourselves in having that kind of escape would be for us to start doing what we should fucking be doing, which is to write our own stories,
There you
make our own
go,
movies, and maybe stop doing this.
yeah.
That's it. Turn it off.
Yeah.
Going back to the typewriter.
Yeah. Well, speaking of other movies, where can everybody find your movies at?
Well, Demon Resurrection is on Tubi TV, and it's on Zumo TV, and it's on Amazon Prime, a pay-per-view on Amazon Prime, and it's on Vimeo on demand, I guess they call it, and it's on a bunch of other platforms all around the world. Demon Resurrection is a sort of combination of The Devil Rides Out and Night of the Living Dead, but a little bit of Rosemary's
A little bit
Baby
of road,
too.
yeah, a little bit.
There is a baby in it. So.
Yeah.
And my other film, Sleepless Nights, is a sort of old-fashioned gothic horror thing done for pennies back in 1999. And I'm remastering it, and we're going to hopefully have it out on streaming platforms by the middle of 2022, if I can get it there sooner. Right now, I'm trying to get the music done. But once that's taken care of, then it'll be out there for people to enjoy.
Just don't punch up the collar too much and leave the gray on there.
Yes. Well, I'm torn because it was shot in standard definition, so I think it could use all the help it can get.
Yeah.
But yeah, that'll be out soon. And if people are fans of Dark Shadows or Hammer films, things like that, then it might be of interest.
Right.
So that's what are you up to? What's on your plate these days?
Just working, trying to keep these episodes going in between my work schedule, and that's about it.
So the people should understand that you have an audio version of these podcasts that you
Yep.
release on Podbean and on
Or on
Apple.
Podbean or whatever. If you just search for it, we're on all the major platforms.
A podcast from beneath.
Yep.
And then you're kind enough to allow me to take the video portion and to do a little editing with it and to put it up on my YouTube channel where it can be ignored, by the way. I put it up on Facebook where it can be ignored even more.
Yeah, I see some people will watch them on there. So,
well, it's fun to do, and I appreciate you having me on. And it'd be nice to have the other guys on every once in a while.
Yeah, I know we're gonna have to. I've got a plan for next week though. So.
Yeah. Oh, you got a plan? Okay,
Yeah.
you're gonna have them taken hostage?
You probably, yeah. All right. Well, this was a fun episode. Like I said, this is like one of my favorite movies. I don't watch it as enough. I guess I shouldn't say I don't watch it as much as I should because I don't think it's something you need to watch all the time to appreciate. But it's one of my favorites.
And you don't want to ruin it for yourself by
Yeah,
watching
yeah.
too much. Yeah. So I
Because then
agree with that.
I'll just start picking it apart.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, anything you watch too much of, you're going to end up starting to see the flaws in, or
Yeah.
just turning against. But if you space out your viewings, then it's a nice little thing to escape to once a year.
Oh yeah.
Usually around Halloween is a good time for something like this.
That'd be a good time to watch it. Yeah.
So well, yes, I agree completely. Terrific film.
All right. So it's a good episode. Until next week, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Take care.